This module focuses on zero-day vulnerabilities and how to prevent their impact through threat modeling and defense in depth. A zero-day is a flaw unknown to the vendor and defenders with no official patch available. Attackers can exploit it before detection or disclosure. That differs from N-days, which are publicly known issues with patches or mitigations already in play. We'll walk the life cycle end-to-end, discovery by researchers or attackers, weaponization into a reliable exploit, initial detection signals, coordinated disclosure, and ultimately the vendor patch. Prevention is about layers, not silver bullets. Build security into the SDLC, harden configs and identities, apply virtual patching at the edge, and use threat intelligence to prioritize exposure. Practically, that means maintaining accurate asset inventory and SBOM, keeping updates flowing, enforcing WAF/IPS at choke points, instrumenting endpoints with EDR, and collecting and correlating logs for rapid triage. We'll apply these concepts to real-world scenarios, highlight best practices you can operationalize, and reinforce them with exam-style questions to check understanding and decision-making under pressure. In this module, we'll focus on what you're expected to achieve and how you'll be assessed. You'll define 0 days, walk through their life cycle from discovery to patch and grasp the attacker economics that make them valuable. You'll map activity to MITRE ATT and CK techniques and high-level exploit chains to frame impact and coverage. We'll build layered prevention across code, endpoints, networks, cloud, and the supply chain, using secure SDLC practices, hardening, least privilege, segmentation, and artifact signing. You'll operationalize risk with asset inventory and SBOM and apply patching or virtual patching when remediation isn't immediately possible. On detection and response, you'll use telemetry to hunt, contain, and coordinate disclosure effectively. Hands-on work includes OSQuery and Sysmon for endpoint telemetry, Zeek and Suricata for network visibility and detection, SIFT and Trivy for SBOM generation, and container scanning, Cosine for signing and verifying artifacts. The exam blueprint emphasizes practical commands, realistic scenarios, and mitigation prioritization under constraints, showing you can choose the right control at the right layer at the right time. What is a 0 day? It's a vulnerability that's unknown to the vendor and the public, so there's no official patch yet. You'll often hear 0 day exploit alongside it. That's the reliable method to trigger the vulnerability. The bug and the exploit are related but not the same. Also, 0 day doesn't automatically mean remote code execution. It could be a local privilege escalation that requires prior access, a logic flaw that bypasses authorization, or just one link in a chained attack. Not all 0 days are catastrophic. Risk depends on 3 things: reach, how exposed the vulnerable surface is, exploitability prerequisites, user interaction, and skill needed, and impact, what the attacker can ultimately do. And remember the key idea on this slide: unknown is not the same as undetectable. Even without a vendor patch, suspicious behavior and abnormal patterns can still be identified and disrupted. This diagram maps the typical 0 day life cycle from first sighting to remediation. Discovery can come from a researcher, an attacker, or automated fuzzing that trips over a new bug. Weaponization turns that bug into a reliable exploit, often chaining multiple issues and tuning delivery for a real vector like a browser tab, document, driver, or kernel path, while bypassing mitigations and stabilizing the payload. Initial use is usually tightly scoped, small, targeted deployments to validate reliability and preserve secrecy. Wider use follows when the exploit leaks, is resold, or the operator decides to scale up telemetry and collateral noise start to rise. Detection sits in the middle because unknown doesn't mean invisible. EDR and IDS can surface abnormal process, memory, and network patterns. Baseline deviations and crash artifacts get correlated, and threat intel reports flag exploited in the wild activity even before a CVE exists. Finally, patch/workaround covers both vendor updates and defensive stopgaps, virtual patching via IPS/EDR rules, configuration hardening, feature flags, reducing service exposure, or access controls. The goal is to compress the window between detection and effective mitigation, limiting blast radius and dwell time regardless of whether the 0 day is remote code execution or a local privilege escalation. This slide is about who plays in the 0 day ecosystem and why the economics matter. Actors include state-backed groups with strategic objectives, cybercriminals focused on profit, and brokers who acquire and resell exploits or access. Defenders and vendors are part of the same system too, funding bug bounties, buying research, and racing to detect and patch. Pricing tracks impact. Reliable chains for browsers or hypervisors can command 6 or 7 figures in private deals, while bug bounties pay less, but offer legal, repeatable income and quicker disclosure. Academic venues often surface techniques and mitigations that shift the market over time. Targets with the biggest payoff are those with reach or choke point control, browsers on endpoints, email gateways that parse untrusted content, VPNs at the perimeter, hypervisors in multi-tenant cloud, and supply chain components that let an attacker fan out to many victims. A common misconception is we can't stop 0 days. You can't prevent every initial exploit, but you can dramatically reduce blast radius and dwell time with isolation, least privilege, segmentation, strong telemetry, rapid patching, and quick containment/rollback. Think about your environment. Which assets would justify a 0-day spend from an adversary's perspective? Identity providers, SSO, MDM, build pipelines, internet-facing gateways, or high-value data stores often top that list. Identifying those crown jewels guides where to invest most heavily in controls and monitoring. This slide frames a 0-day as a chain, not a single event. At a high level, the flow is initial access, a vulnerability trigger, then post-exploitation. Initial access might be a phish, a drive-by in a browser, or a malicious update. The triggers where the bug fires common classes include memory corruption, use after free, out of bounds, logic flaws that bypass checks, and sandbox escapes to break out of a constrained context. Post-exploitation is where attackers escalate privileges, evade controls, move laterally, and extract data. In ATT and CK terms, you'll see techniques across initial access, privilege escalation, defense evasion, and exfiltration. Defense in depth means breaking this chain at multiple points. Reduce initial access with hardening and least privilege. Shrink the trigger window with rapid patching and exploit mitigations. ASLR, depth/CFG, modern compiler flags, strict sandboxes, and blunt post-exploitation with EDR, application control, credential isolation, segmentation, and egress filtering. Best practice. Assume breach. Designed for containment and rapid rollback. Segment high-value assets. Use MFA and just-in-time access. Keep golden images and snapshots. Automate quarantine and redeploy, and be ready to rotate credentials and restore clean state quickly. This slide explains why catching 0 days is so challenging. Early in the lifecycle, you won't have reliable signatures. Attackers lean on legitimate tools and familiar processes, so activity blends into what looks normal. They also use exploits sparingly and briefly, reducing artifacts and shrinking the window for detection. Telemetry gaps make it tougher. Encrypted traffic obscures payloads, network blind spots hide lateral movement, and unmanaged or shadow assets fall outside your visibility. What should you watch for? Unusual parent-child relationships, like winward.exe spawning PowerShell.exe or CMD.exe, especially with encoded or LOL bin-heavy command lines. Policy bypasses, events indicating ANSI, app locker, or script execution policies were disabled or evaded. PowerShell script block logging that captures obfuscation, download and execute patterns, or suspicious module use. Practical tip: baseline normal and alert on deviations. Build per host and per user baselines for process trees, command line arguments, script volume, and outbound destinations. Flag rare parent-child pairs, first-seen domains, sudden spikes in interpreters, and deviations from typical working hours or peer behavior. Threat intelligence is your early warning system for 0 days and fast-moving exploits. Track CISA known exploited vulnerabilities, KEV, vendor advisories, and Google Project Zero to understand what's actively abused and which bug classes are trending. Don't do this manually. Automate feed pools and use them to enrich alerts and drive triage. Quick example: pull the KEV feed to a file, then slice out the most useful fields. curl https://www.cisa.gov/site/default/files/feeds/known exploited vulnerabilities.json okev.json.jq.vulnerability CVEID vendor project product date added kev.json pipe that output into your SIEM or EDR enrichment, so any alert tied to a KEV CVE gets higher priority. Use data added to highlight fresh entries and fast-track containment. Schedule the pull cron, SI, or your orchestration tool Version the feed and alert on deltas so new exploited CVEs trigger immediate reviews. And keep an eye on vendor advisories and Project Zero to anticipate exploitation techniques even before CVEs are assigned. You can't patch what you can't see. Start by knowing exactly what you run infra, applications, and the libraries inside them. Use OSQuery to enumerate software versions at scale with simple SQL-like queries. For example, to find Java installs across endpoints and emit machine-friendly JSON command, OSQuery JSON select name, version, from programs where name like %, Java%, and to spot unexpected changes by hashing a sample of binaries, command, OSQuery select path, SHA-256 from hash, where directory equals /usr/bin limit 5, for deeper component visibility, generate SBOM with SIFT. This lets you track vulnerable packages inside images and directories and standardize the output for tooling. Command, SIFT docker myApp latest OJSON SBOM.json command, SIFT dir, ocyclonid JSON SBOM CDX.json. Automate these inventories on a schedule and centralize the output so you can quickly map assets and components to known CVEs and take action. Patch management that works starts with smart prioritization. Triage vulnerabilities by exploitability using sources like CISA KEV catalog, then factor in exposure internet-facing, privilege level, lateral movement risk and business impact critical services and data. That drives which systems get patched first and how quickly. On Linux, keep updates predictable and reversible. Schedule maintenance windows, test in a staging ring, and snapshot VMs or file systems so you can roll back if needed. For routine updates, run sudo apt-get update and sudo apt-get y upgrade. To validate what will change before you automate, use a dry run. Sudo unattended upgrade dry run debug. On Windows, automate with PS Windows Update and use deployment rings pilot. Broad, mission critical. Install the module and stage updates without forcing a reboot. Install module PS Windows Update. Get Windows Update accept all ignore reboot. Audit recent results and feed them to your reporting or SIEM. Get WU history select object first 10 format table. Measure success with timed patch, compliance rates, and rollback frequency, and coordinate reboots with change windows to minimize impact. Virtual patching buys you time by placing controls in front of vulnerable services so you can reduce risk while waiting for a vendor fix. 2 go-to tools are a web application firewall and an intrusion prevention system. For web apps, mod security with the OWASP core rule set is a strong baseline. Start in detection mode to tune out false positives, then switch to blocking. Enable the module and reload Apache with sudo a2nmod security to and sudo systemctl reload Apache 2. After you've tuned, flip the engine from detection only to on. Sudo sed is/sec rule engine detection only /sec rule engine on // etc /modsecurity/modsecurity.conf. Watch your audit logs and add targeted exceptions for known good traffic to keep noise down. For broader network threats, Suricata can run as IDS/IPS and match on exploit indicators. Launch it against the right interface and rules with sudo suricata ith0s/ etc /suricata/rules-d. Keep signatures current and restart cleanly. Sudo suricata update and sudo systemctl restart suricata. If your network allows, run inline to actively block. Otherwise monitor and alert first to validate impact. These controls don't replace patching, they reduce exposure and raise the bar until you can remediate. This slide is about reducing exploit reliability with built-in memory protections. On Windows, stack these defenses. ASLR randomizes memory layouts, DEP prevents code execution in data pages, CFG validates indirect calls, ACG blocks creating executable memory from writable sources, and CET adds hardware-backed shadow stacks and indirect branch tracking. Audit your current posture with PowerShell using Get Process Mitigation System. To enforce key protections system-wide, use Set Process Mitigation System enable CFG DEP. ASLR and DEP are typically on, but verifying and explicitly enabling CFG can materially raise the bar. ACG and CET apply where hardware and apps support them. On Linux, turn on kernel hardening knobs. Ensure full ASLR with sudo sysctl wkernel.randomize va space equals 2. Reduce live process snooping and code injection by limiting ptrace with sudo sysctl wkernel.yama.ptrace scope equals 2. Consider how user namespaces are used in your environment. They provide isolation benefits, but can expand the attack surface if broadly enabled for untrusted workloads. Apply these settings persistently via your sysctl configuration so they survive reboots. Application sandboxing and control is about limiting blast radius. Run risky apps in confinement and only allow known good code to execute. On Windows, AppLocker enforces an execution allow list. Start by generating a baseline policy that covers scripts, EXEs, and MSIs. New AppLocker policy default rule type script exe MSI XML app.xml. Review the XML, then merge it into the local policy. Set AppLocker policy XML policy app.xml merge. Be sure the application identity service is running, and deploy via group policy to target users or everyone. On Linux, FireJail provides lightweight isolation using namespaces, seccomp, and capability controls. For a browser, FireJail seccomp private Firefox that launches it with a temporary home and a reduced syscall surface. To harden a specific app, further, FireJail blacklist /tmpcaps.drop all/usr/bin/app. Create or tune FireJail profiles for consistency across systems. The objective: default deny execution plus per app sandboxes, so even if code runs, it stays contained. Least privilege and secure defaults are about shrinking the blast radius. Trim anything you don't need: old plugins, legacy services, and unnecessary tools, and ensure what remains runs with only the rights it truly requires. On Linux, prefer fine-grained capabilities over full root. Use getcap r/usr/bin/hid to see binaries already holding capabilities. If a service only needs to bind to a low port, grant just that. Sudo setcap cap netbind service equals plus ep/usr/bin/myservice. That lets it listen on 80 or 443 without running as root. On Windows, lock down application directories so users can run apps but not tamper with them. Remove inherited ACLs and grant read/execute only to standard users. icackle c:\program files /my app/inheritance:r/grant:r users:/rex. Then strip overly broad entries. icackle c:\program files /my app/remove :g. Everyone. The outcome: fewer privileges, fewer write paths, and a smaller attack surface by default. This slide is about shrinking the blast radius with segmentation and adding visibility with an IDS. Start by limiting lateral movement. Place critical systems in their own microsegments and allow only the minimal, documented flows between them. Enforce those policies at multiple layers: network ACLs and host firewall, so an attacker who lands somewhere can't freely move east-west. For visibility, Zeek gives you protocol-level telemetry that's excellent for anomaly detection and hunting. To monitor live traffic on a host or a tap, run sudo zeek ith0. To analyze a capture offline, use zeek rsuspicious.pcap. Zeek will emit rich logs like connections, DNS, HTTP, and TLS you can ship to your scene. On Linux hosts, lock down ingress with a default deny stats and only open what you truly need. For example, set input to drop and allow HTTPS. Sudo iptables p input drop and sudo iptables a input p TCP/D port 443J accept. Make the rules persistent with sudo iptables save /etc/iptables/rules.v4. Apply carefully and include any required management or health check ports to avoid locking yourself out. To detect 0 days, focus on behavior. Collect high-fidelity events for process starts, script execution, network connections, and module load so you can spot anomalies, even without signatures. On Windows, Sysmin provides rich event data for hunting. Install it with your hardened config. Sysmin64.axi sysminconfig.xml exceptula. That captures process creation event ID 1, network connections 3, and image load 7. To quickly verify you're getting data, query the last 10 process creation events. Webtitle key Microsoft Windows sysmin/operational/q. Event system event ID equals 1/c:10/f:. Across platforms, Osquery gives you scheduled queries for 0-day relevant signals. Look for memory-only or deleted binaries still running. Osquery select PID, path, CMD align from processes where on disk equals 0, and surface unexpected exposure by listing listeners that aren't bound to localhost. Osquery select asterisk from listening ports where address not equals 127.0.0.1. Forward these events to your analytics platform baseline normal patterns, and alert on behaviors like unsigned modules loading into sensitive processes, script interpreters spawning outbound connections, and short-lived processes that never touch disk. On this slide, we focus on reducing the impact of 0 days in cloud and container environments. Start by hardening images, use minimal bases, remove unused packages, drop Linux capabilities, and set read-only root file systems. Isolate workloads with namespaces, network policies, and strict RBAC. Then enforce guardrails with security benchmarks and admission policies aligned to CIS controls, and use Kubernetes pod security policies where available or gatekeeper/OPA to block risky configurations at deploy time. For continuous scanning, use Trivy to catch vulnerabilities and misconfigurations early. Try the image severity critical high myrepo/app:/latest Trivy config severity high./k8/ to validate your clusters against CIS benchmarks. Run KubeBench with the correct Kubernetes version and capture structured results you can feed into dashboards or CI gates. KubeBench run version 1.25. KubeBench targets node master JSON kb.json. These practices don't prevent a 0 day from existing, but they drastically shrink blast radius and raise the bar for exploitation in production. Supply chain security and SEA focus on 2 questions. What's in your software? And can you trust where it came from? Start with software composition analysis. Gripe scans container images and file systems to find vulnerable dependencies. For example, run gripe myrepo/app:/latest only fix to report only issues that have available fixes, which helps prioritize what to patch. You can also scan a local directory or an extracted root file system with gripe dir, table, and use structured output in CI to fail builds on high or critical findings. For provenance and integrity, use Cosign to sign and verify container images and attestations. Sign during your build with Cosign sign key cosign.key myrepo/app:/1.2.3. Then verify before deployment with Cosign verify key cosign.pub myrepo/app:/1.2.3. Enforce verification in your pipeline or admission controls so only trusted, signed artifacts run, and attach attestations like SBOM or build metadata to prove how the image was produced. In the contain and triage phase, act quickly to isolate suspected hosts, preserve evidence, and apply short-term mitigations. On Windows, use the built-in firewall to block egress to suspected command and control while you investigate. Netted firewall add rule name equals, block C2 dir equals out action equals, block remote equals 203.0.113.0/24. Then ensure the firewall is enabled for all profiles. Netted firewall set all profiles, state on Linux. Tighten outbound traffic with UFW. Set a default deny and allow only essentials like DNS and web. Sudo UFO default deny outgoing and sudo UFO allow out 53.80.443/TCP enable and verify. Sudo UFO enable and sudo UFO status verbose while containing. Preserve evidence. Avoid unnecessary reboots. Capture volatile data and logs so you can accurately assess scope and root cause. On this slide, we're hunting in Microsoft Defender/XDR with KQL. First, child process anomalies. We look in device process events for Office apps like WinWord.exe or Excel.exe spawning script interpreters such as WScript.exe, PowerShell.exe, or CMD.exe. That pattern is common in macro-driven execution. Consider making the name match case-insensitive using =tilde or $, adding more Office parents PowerPoint, Outlook, and projecting helpful fields like initiating process command line, account name, device name, and SHA1 to speed triage. Second, suspicious execution. From temp, with network activity, we filter processes where folder path contains \appdata\local\temp and exclude system spawns initiating process, ID not equals 0, then left join to device network events on process, ID to surface, outbound connections. For accuracy, include device ID in the join and constrain time generated to a tight window. Project remote URL, remote IP, local port, and initiating process file name, and suppress known updaters to reduce noise. Both hunts are high signal for dropper or initial access activity. Pivot into signer info, prevalence, and parent-child chains to prioritize what to investigate first. This slide shows 2 quick SPL hunts you can drop into Splunk. First, Rundle 32 Lalbas misuse. We're filtering process creation events where the image ends in rundle32.exe and the command line calls url.dll file protocol handler. That pattern is frequently abused to proxy execution or launch remote content. When this hits, pivot to the parent process, user, and full command line. Legitimate activity often comes from explorer.exe. Suspicious parents include Office apps, script hosts, service hosts, or installers. Add fields like parent image, user, computer, and process ID to your table and consider whitelisting known enterprise apps that legitimately invoke this handler. Second, suspicious PowerShell script block logging. Event code 4104 with from base 64 string flags base 64 decoding, a common obfuscation step. Correlate with related process creates and any outbound network events. Decode the captured payload when possible and look for stacked indicators like IEX, download string, ink, or compressed content. Reduce noise by excluding known management scripts and ADR modules, then aggregate by host and user to spot spikes. As you operationalize these, add time bounds, surface hashes where available, and enrich with parent-child context to speed triage. This slide is about making discovery and response a governed, repeatable process. Start with a vulnerability disclosure program. Give researchers a clear reporting channel. Think security.txt, a monitored alias, and a VDP page, and align your intake and handling with ISO/IEC 29147 and 30111 so expectations and workflows are standardized. If you run a bug bounty, be explicit about scope, SLAs, and safe harbor language. Pair that with a triage function that can route issues to engineering fast, with a predefined mitigation path, temporary controls, patches, and verification. Have a pre-auth crisis plan ready for high-severity issues, especially anything exploitable before login. That plan should include communications templates, rollback procedures, and technical levers like feature flags and kill switches to reduce exposure in minutes, not days. When exploitation emerges, track the entire chain as an incident, not just individual CVEs. Link initial access, privilege escalation, and lateral movement in one case so ownership, containment, and metrics are clear. Remember the mindset here. Preparedness turns 0 days into 1 days for your org. This slide calls out the traps that quietly expand your attack surface and the habits that keep it in check. Common pitfalls first. Shadow IT introduces unmanaged apps and services. Regularly reconcile asset scans with identity, DNS, and SAS logs to surface rogues. Stale EDR policies, mean prevention modules or exclusions that were temporary become permanent. Version lock your endpoint detection and response baselines and review exceptions on a cadence. Disabled or thin logging blinds your detection. Centralize, verify retention, and alert on log source drop-offs. Insecure defaults, open ports, permissive IAM, or vanilla cloud configs should be replaced with hardened images and baseline policies. Best practices. Lead with inventory. Maintain current asset and software inventories. Pair them with SBOM software bills of materials to know what's inside what you run. Enforce least privilege and segment networks and identities to limit lateral movement. Prioritize known exploited vulnerabilities and internet exposed assets. Model blast radius. If this box falls, what can it reach and how fast? Prove your resilience. Validate backups with periodic restores. Test runbooks under time pressure, and run tabletop exercises for 0-day scenarios. Measure continuously. Track patch SLAs and TTR for vulnerabilities and incidents and control coverage across endpoints, servers, and cloud. Use these metrics to drive accountability and investment. The goal is fewer surprises, smaller blast radii, and faster, verifiable recovery when not if something breaks. On this slide are sample exam-style prompts. Here's how I'd frame strong answers. Explain virtual patching and when to prefer it over hotfixes. Virtual patching is a compensating control that blocks exploit paths at the network or endpoint layer. Think WAF/IPS signatures, reverse proxy rules, or EDR prevent rules without changing the vulnerable code. Prefer it when no vendor fix exists yet, when patching requires risky downtime, or on legacy systems you can't safely update. It's temporary. Validate effectiveness, monitor, and replace with a real patch. Which telemetry best surfaces 0 days in browsers? Why? Endpoint behavior telemetry, process ancestry and command lines from the browser, exploit mitigation events, DEP/CFG/ACG/exploit protection, code injection indicators, and unexpected child processes, for example browser spawning PowerShell. These are IOC agnostic and expose the sandbox escape and post-exploit behaviors common to unknown exploits. Provide 2 steps to reduce exploit reliability on Windows endpoints. 1. Enable HVCI memory integrity and exploit protection policies for browsers/Office Force ASLR, CFD, block dynamic code. 2. Remove local admin and turn on attack surface reduction rules that block Office/browsers from creating child processes and downloading/executing content. Map a suspected VPN 0-day to 3 MITRE ATT and CK techniques. T1190 exploit public-facing application, device exploit. T1133 external remote services VPN access. T1078 valid accounts abusing or creating accounts/tokens, post-exploit. Given an SBOM, outline triage for critical transient dependency. Identify which artifacts include the vulnerable version log files/build manifests. Assess reachability of the vulnerable code path and internet exposure. Check KEV status and version ranges, and prioritize internet-facing services. If an upgrade exists, pin/override and rebuild. If not, apply virtual patches/IPS rules, feature flags, or config hardening. Validate in staging, roll out with monitoring, and add a policy to prevent reintroduction. Key takeaway: 0 days will happen, but they don't have to become disasters. We manage impact with defense in depth, harden configurations to shrink attack surface, isolate high-risk workloads and browsers, consume threat intelligence to prioritize, collect high-fidelity telemetry from EDR, DNS/proxy, and script logs, and be ready to respond quickly. Make it operational. Maintain an accurate asset inventory and SBOM, patch fast when you can. And use virtual patching WAF rules, EDR/IDS detections, GPO/app locker/SR tweaks when a vendor fix isn't available. Hunt for behaviors, not just indicators. Look for suspicious parent-child process chains, credential access patterns, persistence creation, and abnormal egress, and operate with an assume breach mindset through least privilege and segmentation. For next steps, establish baseline controls, automate updates and configuration enforcement, and routinely rehearse incident response so containment and recovery are muscle memory. This slide lists go-to sources to keep your practice current, seize known exploited vulnerabilities, track real-world exploited CVEs to prioritize patching and compensating controls. Google Project Zero, deep analyses of 0 days, and exploitation techniques to inform hardening and detection. MITRE-AT and CK, a common language for adversary techniques. Map your detections and hunts to it. NIST Secure Software Development Framework, SB 800-218, Guidance to Build and Buy Software with Security in Mind. OWASP AS and SAM, Baselines for App Security Requirements and Maturity Planning. Swift on Security Sysmin Config, a strong starting point for high-signal Windows endpoint telemetry. Trivy, Gripe, Sift, and Cosign. Scan for vulns, generate SBOM, and sign artifacts. Integrate them into CI/CD. Zeek and Suricata, network visibility and IDS for behavior-focused detection at scale. Use these to inform policy, prioritize actions, and operationalize controls across development, endpoints, and the network.